She stole my promotion by sleeping with the boss. I got her fired and divorced, and watching it all unfold from my perfectly orchestrated position was better than any promotion could have ever been. The moment I discovered what Sarah had done, my entire world shifted on its axis. I can still feel the way my hands trembled as I stared at the email notification on my phone at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. The subject line read, "Promotion Announcement, Marketing Director Position." My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it, expecting to see my name after months of 16-hour days, sacrificed weekends, and presentations that had literally reshaped our company's entire marketing strategy. Instead, I saw her name, Sarah Chen. The woman who had started in our department 6 months after me, who had never once stayed past 5 p.m., who had somehow managed to skip every major client crisis while I held the fort. The woman who had asked me to cover her presentations when she had mysterious dentist appointments that always seemed to coincide with important meetings. My phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the kitchen counter. The cold granite seemed to leach all the warmth from my palms as I gripped the edge, trying to process what I was seeing. 3 years of my life. 3 years of building campaigns that had increased our revenue by 40%. 3 years of Richard Morrison, our CEO, telling me I was the backbone of this operation and absolutely essential to our growth. The nausea hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled to the bathroom and dry heaved over the toilet, my body rejecting the reality of what had just happened. When I finally looked up at my reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror, I barely recognized the hollow-eyed woman staring back at me. My carefully styled auburn hair was disheveled, my face pale except for the red blotches spreading across my cheeks. I called in sick the next day. The thought of walking into that office, of having to smile and congratulate Sarah, made my skin crawl. Instead, I sat in my apartment, cycling through every emotion imaginable. Rage that made my vision blur. Devastation that left me curled up on my couch, sobbing into throw pillows. Confusion that gnawed at my insides like acid. But it was the suspicion that took root and refused to let go. I started thinking about all those little things that had never quite added up. The way Richard's eyes would linger on Sarah during meetings. How she'd started wearing those fitted blazers and pencil skirts right around the time the promotion talks began. The hushed conversations I'd walked in on that stopped abruptly when they noticed me. The way she'd suddenly become his go-to person for special projects that somehow never seemed to materialize into actual deliverables. 3 days later, I forced myself back into the office. Sarah was already in the corner office that should have been mine, hanging up a framed photo of her and her husband at some charity gala. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood in the doorway, watching her arrange her desk accessories with the same precision she'd applied to stealing my career. She looked up and gave me that smile, the one I'd mistaken for friendship for so long. Warm, genuine, with just a hint of sympathy around the edges. "Hey, Emma," she said, her voice carrying that perfect note of concern. "I know this must be difficult." Richard really struggled with the decision. The words hit me like a slap. Richard struggled with the decision, as if choosing between us had been some agonizing moral dilemma instead of whatever sick arrangement they'd worked out between them. I managed to nod and mumble something about being happy for her, but inside, something crystallized. Something cold and hard and utterly focused. I spent the next week in a state of hypervigilance, cataloging every interaction between Sarah and Richard, the way he'd stop by her office just a little too often, how their business lunches seemed to stretch well into the afternoon, the private calls she'd take behind closed doors, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. But it was the hotel receipt that changed everything. I'd been staying late again, trying to lose myself in work, when I noticed the cleaning crew had knocked over Sarah's trash can. As I bent to help pick up the scattered papers, a crumpled receipt caught my eye. The Fairmont Hotel, room 412. 2 nights ago. The same night she'd texted our team group chat saying she was working from home with a migraine. My hands shook as I smoothed out the receipt. The charges were all there. Room service for 2. Champagne. A late checkout fee. I took a photo with my phone before carefully placing the receipt back in the trash, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, that hotel receipt searing itself into my retinas. I knew I should feel devastated. I knew I should feel heartbroken. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Something that scared me with its intensity. I felt powerful, because now I knew. Now I had proof. And knowledge, I was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous weapon of all. I started my research the next morning. It began innocently enough, just idle curiosity about Richard's wife, Margaret. A few Google searches led me to her social media profiles, her charity work, her book club. She was beautiful in that understated way that spoke of old money and good breeding. Blonde hair, always perfectly styled, clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but never flashy about it. Margaret Morrison was a kindergarten teacher at an exclusive private school. She volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. She posted pictures of homemade cookies and family game nights. She was, by all accounts, a genuinely lovely person who clearly adored her husband and their 2 teenage daughters. The more I learned about Margaret, the more my resolve hardened. This woman didn't deserve what was happening to her. She didn't deserve to be humiliated and betrayed by the man she'd trusted with her heart and her future. But I needed more than a hotel receipt. I needed something undeniable. I started arriving at the office earlier and staying later, not out of dedication this time, but out of strategic necessity. I mapped out Richard's schedule, Sarah's patterns, their overlapping absences. I noted which days they both called in sick, which afternoons they both vanished for client meetings that never appeared on our shared calendar. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. I was working late again, the office empty except for the security guard making his rounds, when I heard voices coming from Richard's office. Low, intimate voices that had no business being there at 9 p.m. on a Friday night. I crept closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap I could see them. Richard had Sarah pressed against his desk, his hands tangled in her hair, her legs wrapped around his waist. The sight made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to stay, to watch, to document. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The camera's quality wasn't perfect in the dim light, but it was clear enough to show Richard Morrison, married father of 2, CEO of our company, locked in an embrace with his employee. Clear enough to show Sarah Chen, also married, grinding against him with an enthusiasm that made my skin crawl. I watched them for exactly 47 seconds before I had to leave, but those 47 seconds were all I needed. Back at my apartment, I sat in my kitchen with a glass of wine and stared at the video on my phone. I felt hollow, emptied out, like someone had scooped out my insides and left only the shell. But underneath the hollowness was something else. Something that pulsed with a steady, cold rhythm. Determination. I spent the weekend researching. I learned about Margaret's routine, her habits, her vulnerabilities. I discovered that she had a public Facebook account where she posted regularly about her family and her students. I found Sarah's husband David on LinkedIn. He worked for a tech startup, one of those earnest, idealistic companies that prided itself on ethical business practices and work-life balance. David Chen looked like the kind of man who believed in doing the right thing. His profile picture showed him at some charity run, sweaty and grinning, a medal around his neck. His posts were full of gratitude for his wife, pride in their shared accomplishments, excitement about their future plans. They were trying to have a baby. I learned from a post about their recent vacation to a fertility clinic in Colorado. My heart ached for him, for Margaret, for all the innocent people who were about to have their worlds shattered by the selfishness of 2 people who had already taken so much. But that ache was quickly overwhelmed by something else, a cold, calculating fury that settled in my chest like a stone. I started planning. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I wasn't going to destroy them with some elaborate scheme or dramatic confrontation. I was going to let them destroy themselves. All I had to do was make sure the right people saw what was already happening. Step 1 was timing. I needed to wait for the perfect moment when the damage would be maximum and the fallout unavoidable. I monitored their schedules, their patterns, their moments of maximum vulnerability. Step 2 was documentation. I needed more than one video, more than one hotel receipt. I needed a pattern of behavior that couldn't be dismissed as a momentary lapse in judgment. So I started collecting evidence with the methodical patience of a scientist. I found receipts for dinners at restaurants across town, always on the same nights. I documented their coordinated absences from the office. I took photos of Sarah's car in the parking lot of Richard's gym at times when she had no business being there. I even managed to get a shot of them together at a wine bar downtown, Richard's hand resting possessively on Sarah's lower back. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Sarah herself. She had started getting careless, drunk on power and the thrill of her secret affair. She'd take personal calls at work, speaking in hushed tones that carried just far enough for me to catch fragments. She'd text constantly during meetings, her face lighting up with an expression that had nothing to do with quarterly projections. One afternoon, I was walking past her office when I heard her on the phone. She was facing away from the door, her voice low but not quite low enough. "No, David won't be home until late," she was saying. "We can have the whole afternoon. I missed you so much during the conference." I stopped walking, my blood turning to ice. "The promotion is just the beginning," she continued. "Richard says once the merger goes through, there will be even more opportunities. We'll be able to be more open then. More open." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not only were they having an affair, but they were planning a future together. A future built on the ruins of their marriages and my career. I stood there in the hallway, listening to Sarah plan her new life with my boss, and felt something shift inside me. The last vestige of hesitation, of moral uncertainty, crumbled away. They had made their choice. Now it was time for them to live with the consequences. That night, I created anonymous email accounts. I researched the board members of our company, found their contact information, learned about their personal values and moral stances. I crafted messages that were professional, concerned, and utterly devastating. But I didn't send them yet. I needed one more piece of evidence, something that would make the story undeniable and complete. I got it 2 weeks later. I had been monitoring Richard's calendar, noting a pattern of investor meetings that seemed to coincide perfectly with Sarah's mysterious appointments. On a Thursday afternoon, I decided to follow them. I waited until they both left the office, then trailed Richard's BMW through downtown traffic. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt like I was in some kind of spy movie, except the stakes were real and the ending was going to be written by me. They met at the Fairmont Hotel, the same hotel from the crumpled receipt. I watched from my car as they walked in together, Sarah's hand briefly touching Richard's arm before they separated and walked to the elevators like strangers. I waited 30 minutes, then followed them inside. The lobby was busy with conference attendees and tourists, providing perfect cover. I positioned myself where I could see the elevators, pretending to read emails on my phone while I watched for them to reappear. They came down together 2 hours later. Richard looked satisfied, relaxed, like a man who had just concluded a successful business deal. Sarah looked radiant, her hair slightly mussed, her lipstick reapplied but not quite perfectly. I followed them to the hotel bar where they sat at a corner table and shared a bottle of wine. I found a spot at the bar where I could watch them without being obvious, nursing a martini while I documented everything. Richard kept touching her. Small touches that could have been innocent if you didn't know better. A hand on her shoulder when he leaned in to whisper something. Fingers trailing across her wrist as she reached for her wine glass. The kind of casual intimacy that spoke of a relationship that had moved far beyond the professional. But it was what I overheard that gave me the final piece of my puzzle. "Margaret is going to visit her mother next weekend," Richard was saying, his voice low but carrying in the quiet bar. "We'll have the whole house to ourselves." Sarah smiled, that same warm smile she'd given me in her office. "I'll tell David I'm going to the spa with my sister. He never questions those trips." They were discussing their next rendezvous with the casual ease of people who had been doing this for a while. People who felt secure in their deception, confident that they were smarter than everyone around them. I paid my tab and left, my hands shaking as I walked back to my car. I had everything I needed now, everything except the courage to pull the trigger. That night, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, the anonymous email accounts glowing on the screen. I had the videos. I had the photos. I had the documented pattern of behavior. I had the hotel receipts and the coordinated absences and the casual conversation about deceiving their spouses. All I had to do was hit send, but something held me back. Some last vestige of the person I used to be, the person who believed in playing fair and trusting the system. The person who would have reported this through proper channels and trusted that justice would prevail. That person was naive. That person had been used and discarded and betrayed. That person had lost everything while trying to do the right thing. I closed the laptop and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah in my office, in my job, living my life while I was left with nothing. I thought about Richard, smug and satisfied, thinking he had gotten away with it. I thought about Margaret and David, going about their lives in blissful ignorance while their spouses planned their betrayals. Something had to give. Someone had to pay. The next morning, I woke up with perfect clarity. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew exactly when I was going to do it. I was going to wait until the company's annual board meeting. The one scheduled for next month, when all the major investors and board members would be present, when Richard would be presenting our quarterly results and future projections, when Sarah would be there as the new marketing director, basking in the glory of her stolen position. I was going to wait until they felt completely safe, completely secure in their victory. And then I was going to detonate a bomb that would destroy everything they had built on the foundation of their lies. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day, I had to watch Sarah sit in my office, making decisions that should have been mine, taking credit for work that I had laid the groundwork for. Every day, I had to smile and nod when Richard praised her innovative thinking or strategic vision. But I used that time productively. I gathered more evidence, refined my approach, and most importantly, I prepared myself for what was coming. I knew that once I sent those emails, there would be no going back. The fallout would be massive and immediate. Richard would be fired, possibly face criminal charges if the board decided to pursue them. Sarah would be terminated, her reputation destroyed, her marriage likely over. The company would be thrown into chaos, stock prices would plummet, and innocent employees would suffer. But I also knew that doing nothing was no longer an option. They had made their choice when they decided to build their future on the destruction of others. Now they would have to live with the consequences. 3 days before the board meeting, I made my final preparations. I created a detailed timeline of the affair, complete with photographic evidence and documented proof of their deception. I compiled financial records showing how company resources had been used for their personal meetings. I even managed to get a copy of Richard's corporate credit card statements, showing charges at restaurants and hotels that corresponded perfectly with their secret rendezvous. The night before the meeting, I couldn't eat. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the laptop screen, my finger hovering over the send button. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. I thought about Margaret, probably at home making dinner for her daughters, planning some family activity for the weekend. I thought about David, maybe working late at his startup, excited to come home to the wife he loved and trusted. I thought about the board members, preparing for what they assumed would be a routine quarterly meeting. None of them knew what was coming. None of them knew that by tomorrow evening, their worlds would be turned upside down. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and hit send. The emails went out at 11:47 p.m., exactly 1 month after I had received the promotion announcement that started this entire journey. The timing felt poetic, like some kind of cosmic justice. I sent the evidence to every member of the board of directors, to the head of human resources, to the company's legal department, and to the ethics hotline. I sent it to Margaret Morrison and David Chen because they deserved to know the truth about their spouses. I even sent it to the local business journalists who covered our industry because the story was too big to be buried in corporate bureaucracy. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and waited. The first response came at 6:23 a.m., the head of human resources demanding an emergency meeting. Then the legal department asking for more information. Then the board members, their outrage and shock evident even in their carefully worded emails. By 8 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in a conference room with half the executive team, being questioned about my allegations. By 10 a.m., Richard Morrison was being escorted from the building by security, his face ashen, his career over. Sarah lasted until noon. I watched from my desk as she was called into HR, her confident stride faltering as she saw the grim faces waiting for her. She emerged 20 minutes later, her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking as she packed her personal belongings into a cardboard box. She looked at me as she walked past my desk, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes that might have been recognition, understanding. She knew. She knew exactly who had brought down her house of cards. I met her gaze steadily, my expression neutral. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply looked at her with the same professional courtesy I had shown her every day for the past 4 months. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it and kept walking. I watched her disappear around the corner, the sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor growing fainter until it was gone entirely. The office was chaos for the rest of the day. Executives huddled in conference rooms, their voices urgent and hushed. The IT department was called in to secure Richard's computer and email accounts. The legal team worked frantically to assess the company's liability and exposure. Through it all, I sat at my desk and worked. I answered emails, updated project timelines, prepared reports for the interim management team. I was the picture of professionalism, the model employee who had simply done her civic duty by reporting unethical behavior. But inside I was burning with a cold, satisfied fire. It was done. They were gone. Justice, delayed though it might have been, had finally arrived. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Richard was fired immediately, his severance package voided due to the morality clause in his contract. Sarah was terminated for cause, her references destroyed, her reputation in the industry ruined. The board appointed an interim CEO and launched a full investigation into the company's practices and procedures. Margaret Morrison filed for divorce within a week, her lawyer making it clear that she intended to take Richard for everything he was worth. David Chen was more private in his response, but I heard through mutual connections that he had moved out of the house he shared with Sarah and was staying with friends while he figured out his next steps. The story hit the business press 2 weeks later. Tech CEO fired for affair with employee, screamed the headlines. The articles were devastating, detailing not just the affair but the abuse of power, the corruption of the promotion process, the betrayal of fiduciary duty to shareholders. Richard tried to fight it at first, hiring expensive lawyers and PR firms to control the narrative. But the evidence was too overwhelming, too well documented to be disputed. The photos, the videos, the financial records, the timeline of deception, it all painted a picture of a man who had systematically abused his position for personal gain. Sarah simply disappeared. She deleted her social media accounts, changed her phone number, and moved out of the city. I heard rumors that she had taken a job with a small nonprofit in another state, a significant step down from her stolen position as marketing director. As for me, I was promoted to marketing director 3 months later. The position I should have had all along, earned through my work rather than given as a consolation prize. The board made it clear that they valued my integrity and professionalism in handling such a difficult situation. I moved into the corner office that had briefly been Sarah's, removing her personal touches and making it my own. I kept the door open, a symbol of the transparency and honesty I intended to bring to the role. But late at night, when the office was empty and I was alone with my thoughts, I would sometimes think about the cost of what I had done. The collateral damage, the innocent people who had been hurt. Margaret and David, whose marriages had been destroyed not by my actions, but by the choices their spouses had made. The employees who had lost their jobs when the company's stock price plummeted and cost-cutting measures were implemented. I told myself that I had simply revealed the truth, that I had exposed corruption and abuse of power, that justice had been served and the right people had been held accountable. Most days I believed it. Most days I felt satisfied with how everything had turned out. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I wondered if I had become someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of destruction on a massive scale, someone who had chosen revenge over forgiveness, justice over mercy. Those thoughts never lasted long. I would remember the hotel receipts, the video of them together, the casual way they had discussed deceiving their spouses. I would remember the promotion that should have been mine, the years of hard work that had been dismissed, the trust that had been betrayed, and I would sleep soundly, knowing that I had done what needed to be done. 6 months later, I got a letter from Margaret Morrison. She was teaching at a new school, living in a small apartment with her daughters, rebuilding her life one day at a time. She thanked me for my courage in exposing the truth, for giving her the information she needed to make informed decisions about her future. She didn't hate me, she wrote. She understood that I had been a victim too, that I had simply been strong enough to fight back when others might have remained silent. She hoped that someday, when the dust settled, we might be able to meet for coffee and talk about how we had both survived the wreckage of other people's choices. I kept that letter in my desk drawer, reading it whenever I doubted the righteousness of my actions. Margaret Morrison had lost her marriage, her financial security, her comfortable life. But she had gained something too. She had gained the truth. She had gained her freedom from a man who had betrayed her trust and made a mockery of their vows. That, I told myself, was worth everything. The company recovered, eventually. New leadership was installed, new policies were implemented, and the culture slowly shifted toward something more ethical and transparent. I played a role in that transformation, using my position to advocate for fair promotion practices and clear ethical guidelines. I never heard from Sarah again. Sometimes I would wonder what had become of her, whether she had found happiness in her new life, or if she was still living with the consequences of her choices. But mostly, I didn't think about her at all. Richard Morrison, on the other hand, made occasional appearances in the business press, usually in the context of failed ventures or legal troubles related to his divorce. He had fallen far from his position as a respected CEO, and the fall had been as public as it was complete. I felt no sympathy for him. He had made his choices, and now he was living with the results. Just as I was living with mine. A year later, I was sitting in my office, reviewing quarterly reports, when I received an unexpected visitor. David Chen stood in my doorway, looking older than I remembered, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He asked if we could talk privately. I closed the door and offered him a seat, my heart racing as I wondered what he wanted to say. He thanked me, simply and directly. He said that discovering the truth about his marriage had been devastating, but that it had also been necessary. He had been planning to start a family with Sarah, to build a life based on what he now knew had been a lie. My actions had saved him from that deeper betrayal, that more profound heartbreak. He was dating someone new, he told me. Someone honest and kind, someone who shared his values and his vision for the future. He was happy, or at least on his way to happiness, and he wanted me to know that my courage had made that possible. After he left, I sat in my office and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. The weight I had been carrying for months, the doubt and guilt and uncertainty about my actions, finally lifted. I had done the right thing. Not the easy thing, not the kind thing, but the right thing. I had exposed the truth and let the consequences fall where they may. I had refused to be a victim and had taken control of my own destiny. She had stolen my promotion by sleeping with the boss. But in the end, I had gotten something far more valuable than any job title. I had gotten justice. I had gotten revenge. And I had gotten the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the good guys really do win. The promotion was just the beginning. The real victory was watching their carefully constructed lies crumble into dust, knowing that I had been the architect of their destruction. It was cold comfort, perhaps, but it was comfort nonetheless. And in the quiet moments of my new life, built on the ashes of their old one, I found that cold comfort was enough.